Hello. We are getting started. I know there's some folks still coming in. Before we get started and before we even introduce ourselves, 3 things. 1, I have 50 copies of this handout that we're going to go over briefly later on in today's session. Please share. I'm sorry I didn't bring more than 50. It was a tight suitcase. It was really hard. The photocopier broke down and so forth. 2, we are looking for 2 volunteers to do something during this session, and we're trying something out here. Part of this is related to something I'm doing with the communications committee. I'm looking for a volunteer today who is willing to write some high-level notes of this session. A lot of you are taking notes anyway. I'm wondering if there's someone who can take high-level notes and then be able to send me or send us the notes by tomorrow. Is that possible? Anyone willing to do that? Yes, thank you, Kathy Harlan. Second volunteer. We absolutely have to have people talk in the microphone when they have questions. Trust me, the people in the back and the acoustics in this room are really bad. It's hard to hear questions. So, yeah.
And we're recording the session, so unless you speak into the microphone, it will not be heard on the recording what the question was.
Right. So you have 2 options. I mean, I know a lot of folks don't like necessarily getting up from their seat to walk to the mic. So is there another volunteer that is willing to pass along the mic like Phil Donahue style? Yes, all right.
Thank you.
So when we start breaking for questions, just feel free to get up, get the mic, and pass it around. How's that? We love you. All right, I think we're ready to get started.
Okay. Do you want to start by introduction?
Yeah, I'll start introductions. So I'm Stephanie Scott from Columbia University.
I'm Amanda Humphrey. I'm from Northeastern University.
And I'm Amanda Haymaker from Purdue University.
All right, here we go. So today's agenda, packed with a combination of discussion, a combination of updates. And so we're going to talk about the common rule. You're probably wondering what that has to do with subawards. I'll take you there, you'll see. Then we're going to go to a financial questionnaire update and an upcoming pilot. Amanda, I know, is going to talk about the wonderful work her working groups have done on the templates. And we're also going to talk about samples, brief discussion on guidance, and this chart that was distributed that you're going to have to share, followed by other collaborations and other things we're working on, like the survey. So, All right, single IRB. I'm about to take you on a school trip. Think of this as a trip to the amusement park. We're going to the Common Rule theme park and the single IRB roller coaster ride. Now, what does this have to do with subawards? Please stick with me as I take you through this ride, because there's going to be a slide as you get off the roller coaster where it's all going to make sense and come full circle to you. One disclaimer I have is that I am not an IRB expert. I am sure at your institutions you have folks at your IRB or your VPs who are really staying on top of this issue. And as we go through this discussion, I'm not going to be going into the details of the common rule. I'm going through very different things, such as implementation dates, and again, its impact on subawards. So if you have specific IRB questions, I'm probably not going to answer those. I'm trying to get you to think about this a different way. So here we go. Here's a little recap of what took place almost 2 years ago. So let's talk about the NIH single IRB policy and what projects fell into that policy. And for those of you who are in subawards, maybe you aren't as in tune with the particulars with this, depending on what your role is. But let me give you a recap. So that took place and became effective for all competing grant applications to the NIH that were due on or after January 25th, 2018. And so what requires a single IRB plan and a proposal? What projects are subject to IRB? And this is very important. It was requirement if you had 2 or more domestic sites, so not foreign, that were working with human subjects, conducting the same protocol for non-exempt research. Now keep in mind that this took effect, this NIH policy, before the common rule requirements took effect. All right, and there are some exceptions to this rule. So to this policy. So for example, training grants and fellowships, they don't fall under this. Career development awards, it looks like, so there are some exceptions. Now, going to the next one. So I got you up the hill on the roller coaster. This is where things start getting a little crazy and we're going to go winding around. So the common rule was initially published in 2017, amended January 2018, effective then July 2018 for optional implementation of 3 provisions of it. So then, within the common rule, there were compliance dates for most elements of it. So for example, the different new exemption criteria, and there's different exemption numbers, that took place January 21st of 2019. And the compliance date for single IRB review was to take place January 2020. So we're not quite there yet. And so keep in mind, NIH issued this policy just for them last year. And so now we're broadening it, right? It's not just NIH anymore. We're talking about 20 federal agencies excluding the FDA, so they don't follow the common rule. But it does include federal agencies that we're used to working with quite a lot. So besides NIH, it includes NSF, it includes all the HHS agencies, it includes DOD, it includes Department of Energy. And so we're talking about all these federal agencies now transitioning over to single IRB. Now, here we go with some more winding of the roller coaster here. And this is where things get a little crazy. And this is what's being discussed now nationally, which is the single IRB requirement for cooperative research, and I put that in italics, applies to all new federally funded research approved on or after January 21st, 2019. Well, wait a minute. How is that different from this? So in recent interpretations and through various presentations that may have been done by OHRP, the Office of Human Research Protections, basically what they had clarified is that the single IRB requirement really takes place for research where the protocols are already active and approved on or after January 21st, 2019. So in other words, projects that were IRB approved January 21st, 2019 have to then transition to single IRB by January 20th, 2020. So what I'm talking about are active projects that may not have been subject to single IRB before, now transitioning over to single IRB. And so if you want to read more about the details about this, there was a letter that was written by Koger on May 1st that is published online, where they wrote a letter to OHRP expressing their concerns over this transition and the need for additional clarification and guidance in order to do this. And we have not heard a response yet since that May 1st letter. And so that was about 4 months ago, a little over 4 months ago. So we're still waiting in terms of what this means. All right, so now we're at the top of the roller coaster and we're just hanging there for a minute. And this is the scary part. So this is where we have discussion. So what discussions at your institutions have taken place about active projects transitioning to single IRB? So, is anyone here familiar with if you've been having these discussions at your institution, waiting to find out about active projects that may need to transition to single IRB? So there have been. Okay, so I'm seeing a yes. Anyone else? Is this the first you're hearing of it? For some of you. People are afraid to say. Okay, so that's all right. So here's another question. Forget that for a moment. This is something you may be familiar with now. Are you currently indicating which IRB is the single IRB in your subawards? Anybody doing that? I got a hand. Okay, I got some more hands. No one wants to talk about it. Okay, okay. Oh, I got someone. Mike, you want to use the microphone? You want to pass the mic? My mic passer volunteer is going to pass you the mic. Unless, oop, here she comes. Unless you want to get up to the mic.
Hi, I'm Tina from Dana-Farber, and we have been very actively using the single IRB process So is it necessary to declare the use of single IRB via a subaward because the investigators need to mutually agree on which institution is going to be the single IRB of record?
Excellent question, which is the question I bring to this audience, actually. I wanted to hear if other institutions were choosing to do that, or they were just relying on the separate reliance agreements, which is a separate process, usually separate from your subawards. And so, I mean, I don't think it's a must. I can't really say, because that's a different process that's being handled through a different agreement. But I wanted to hear from you, if you have been doing that, do you think that's necessary? You're not sure. Maybe you're just thinking about this. All right. Any other questions on this? Yes. So we're gonna, yep, she's getting the mic passed. Great.
So I can make a comment about our current practice and then I have a question. So currently, we do require, for non-single IRB, we require the subrecipient to provide a copy of an IRB approval letter before we execute the agreement.
Okay.
So necessarily under single IRB, we have to know that they have been added to the protocol and have completed all of the necessary single IRB requirements before we would execute that award. So I say yes, for my process, I would need to have that documented in the subaward. My question is, for this transition to projects in single IRB, does that include DoD projects?
They are one of the 20 agencies that fall under the common rule, so I would think yes, but again, I'm not the expert on single IRB. I'm just bringing this to your attention.
Okay.
Can I ask if part of your question is also about the fact that they then require you to take the IRB that you approved and send it to them, and then they approve your approval?
Actually, it's not, so that's a very good point, because the Bureau piece, the HARCO piece to think about there. No, I'm selfishly asking because in addition to our NIH-funded research, we do a lot of DoD.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay.
I have another question.
You've got another
or a comment.
So we do it because I'm not necessarily certain that there is a connection between what the IRB is doing and what we're doing, and who's managing that. So in terms of, okay, the IRB knows, yes, everyone's relying on us, great. But are they following up with every single site and saying you have a reliance agreement in place? I don't know. And I know that when we get incoming awards and we're relying on their IRB, I don't always get the right answer when I ask our department, hey, have you put in a seed review application with our IRB? Do you have a reliance agreement? Yeah, I don't know. And then they have to go through a whole process. So by not issuing a we're not paying these sites, at least are holding something to make sure all the stuff is in place.
Yeah, and sometimes what we do along dovetailing with that is we'll issue the subaward, but we send it out unsigned, and we will point out to them, these are the things that you need to do before we will sign it. We haven't had a lot of SIRB awards that we've had to manage, but that's what we would do along that same line of that's really the opportunity that you have to check that, if that's something that you're going to check. But I'm not sure, for each institution, what you think about the activity around the reliance agreements and what your IRB is doing and what your faculty are expected to do with respect to the IRB if there is an SIRB.
Yep.
Just to give a different perspective, so I'm in the pre-board office at Johns Hopkins, and we have 3 respective IRB offices. For public health, which is roughly about half of funding that comes in, half comes. For our IRB, we send a concurrence notification to the IRB when we have information that there is, or we read the scope or any PK, so any involvement, there's an affirmative. And then they take on that responsibility to ensure that a reliance agreement is in place, approvals in place. They lift that from us. All they do is return to us that, yes, this can be fully executed. We do the concurrent processing. We wait, we hold it if we have to until they give us the concurrence But we don't, everything else is deferred to them, just to give you an idea that there is another process out there that can play.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. There's one little piece of this that I forgot to mention, which was I italicized this definition of cooperative research. And essentially, remember I said the NIH policy came out before the common rule then became effective. And so under this common rule definition of what projects should be covered under single IRB, it's a little broader than NIH's definition. And so NIH's definition, remember, or their requirement, it was 2 or more domestic sites working with human subjects conducting the same protocol, non-exempt research. Common rule, it doesn't have to be the same protocol. So in other words, there could potentially be NIH active projects out there that weren't deemed necessary to fall under single IRB, but now would because of the broadening of this definition. And so finally, so what does this have to do with subawards? So we brought up a couple of these points. And I'm giving here a screenshot of what our current templates, before the new ones come out, what the language was in here when you selected human subjects in your templates. And so remember, there were 2 drop-down options. The first one says the PTE requires verification of IRB and or IACUC approval to be sent to whoever is designated there as follows. And so you have upon request, prior to execution of this agreement, prior to execution of this agreement and annually thereafter, or not required for the following reason. And then you had another drop-down that says the pass-through entity is acting as the single IRB, there's a single IRB designated, it's exempt, or approval sought after year 1. So what I'm just trying to get you to think about is, and we're still waiting for clarification or more information into how all this is rolling out, is with your active subawards, if you initially said that something wasn't designated as single IRB, but now it's transitioning to single IRB, do you then have to amend the subaward? Which is where I was trying to take everyone. Now you see where we were going. We're off the roller coaster now. Everyone is dead silent. I don't know if it's because I'm depressing you or it's because you're you're absorbing this information. Yeah.
Oh, could we get the
But
microphone?
isn't the ultimate goal to get approval? So does it matter whether
Use the mic, yeah.
Isn't the ultimate goal to verify that approval is in place? Does
Yes.
it really matter if it's a single IRB or the institutional IRB? Because in our experience, we may be the pass-through entity, but we're not doing single IRB review. So the institution that you're subcontracting with could potentially be the single IRB point of contact.
Yes, so if you did want to note them, like there is an SIRB designated, if it's not the PTE, I think our instructions to people were generally just write it in additional terms, because see below, and you can say the subrecipient is the SIRB of record, and so you can definitely note it. Or if there's another institution that's the SIRB of record that is neither the PTE or the subrecipient, you can also note that as well. But we can try and make that a little bit more clear in the guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my initial concern was if we have active projects that initially were labeled as we're expecting you to give us your IRB approval, but then they're falling off and they're relying on someone else's single IRB, do we then have to amend the subaward to now say, well, the pass-through entity is acting as a single IRB, or there's a single IRB designated? In other words, do we now have to make that clear and through an amendment of the subaward?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. What's your take on it?
I feel like if you put upon request, no, because it's just a request, and you won't request it if you don't need it.
Right.
But if you wanted to be more, that's the reason why we put other drop-downs in here is because people wanted more options, because a lot of people were asking for attachments and that didn't work. So we're just trying to be more specific, just to help get away from having to send the attachments all the time. So I guess now it's entering us, but I think upon request, yeah.
If they didn't select upon request when you did the initial subaward,
I would want them to change it if they said prior, annually thereafter or something. I would want them to change it so then I don't have to submit them their own approval every year.
okay. So bottom line, because I don't want to spend too much time on this because we got a lot of other stuff that we got to cover, and I know I can tell that you're kind of absorbing it, and I don't know, do people understand what the potential issue is? Okay. Bottom line, we're staying on top of it. We're waiting for more direction to see where things go. I know at my institution, at some other institutions, they're preparing for this eventual possible, definite transition potentially with active projects, and so we're monitoring the situation. And so what I'm expecting is that you'll probably want guidance from us either through a couple of FAQs or something to kind of help you if you're in this situation where you have to transition. So I was just bringing it up to have you think about it, and if you have other suggestions so that it's the least burdensome possible in dealing with this transition, then I think that we're all open to it. Okay, so we're going to move on. As you know, or if you've heard us talk before, there's a working group that has worked on this financial questionnaire, what we call the FQ, for entities that are not subject to single audit. And they worked really hard on this because the eventual goal is to have a document that, that we could all potentially use, an FDP-approved document, which could potentially reduce burden if we all agree on the same questions that we're asking those that are not subject to single audit. So, of course, like also those that are not in the expanded clearinghouse. So they prepared, the working group prepared the questionnaire as well as guidance for the pass-through entity and the subrecipient, and we're at the point right now where we're almost ready to launch a pilot. And when we initially sent this out to the community, there were 35 respondents that said, they indicated that they would be interested in testing out this financial questionnaire. They liked it. And so right now we're at the point of what data do we want to collect from this pilot and what's the story that we want to tell. So what we're examining right now is we don't want to make it difficult for people. We want to make it as simple as possible. It makes sense to collect information on an Excel sheet, maybe do it through Qualtrics. So we're considering our options at the moment, and also its future possibilities. And so in the next slide, what we're considering asking, so we want to ask questions of pass-through entities as well as the subrecipients that are completing it. And so we want to ask the subrecipients, hey, was it easy for you to understand these questions? How long did it take you to complete it? Was the guidance that we provided helpful for you? How willing would you be to make this information available in a public clearinghouse? So we're thinking a little bit longer term here in terms of how can we potentially maybe take these questions, maybe at some point down the road, this is something we can incorporate into the expanded clearinghouse for those entities that are not subject to single audit. We're far from that discussion, but we're preparing just in case. Well, how willing would you be, to have this information publicly available? And then for the pass-through entities, what was the quality of the responses you received? How much time did it take when you sent it out for the institution to give it back? And how long did it take you to review it? So if you have questions or may be interested in participating in this pilot, we have a dedicated email address, fq@thefdp.org. And like I said, we'll be communicating through the listserv once we're ready to launch. Take it away.
So this says have been posted, but we're in the process of posting the subaward forms, so they will be posted hopefully by the beginning of next week. We'll say the beginning of next week. I'm hoping the end of this week, but we'll send out an email when they're officially posted. They will go up on our standard subaward forms page. We've updated a lot of documents, so the subaward templates have all been uploaded. Those are the first two, and then also the foreign, which are in that same PDF format, but they're technically samples. They're not templates. The cost reimbursement subaward. Oh, I think that's supposed to say the I think I copied and pasted too much, sorry. That's supposed to say, remind everyone that the subcontract sample is up there. That's a Word document. And we are in the process of updating the fixed rate clinical research sample, and that will probably go up a couple of weeks after. But in advance of the templates going up, we should all acknowledge the hard work of the working group. And in particular, I wanted to acknowledge Laura Register, who is here this time, and thank her because Laura is the one that does all of the programming on the templates, and they would not be as user-friendly and functional as they are if it weren't for Laura. So
Oh, yes.
thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Really helpful, and she'll take my bizarrely worded emails and turn them into something that is an actual thing that we can all use. So thank you. That is fantastic. We are planning to do webinars for these, and they are going to be hosted by the National Academies as they have in years past. Both webinars will be the same, like we have the same script that we use each time for the webinars, but we hold 2 sessions so that people are able to ask questions kind of live and in person. So we recommend that you sign up for one or the other and not both. And you can have as many people in your office attend as you want. I think the times on them are both in the afternoon because we're trying to make sure that we get the West Coast people. And for our friends at the University of Hawaii, I think one of them is late enough in the day that it will even be during the Hawaii business day. So once those are run, we will post one instance of the webinar, whichever one we think kind of ran more smoothly. And then we're looking at this, and compared to the first time, we kind of did a cohesive update of the templates. I think the year before last, like the 2015 or 2016 release that we did, I think we got over 100 recommendations of things to change for the templates. This past iteration, we had kind of 2 years, and people really did not make that many change requests, so it was definitely less than 50. So we're thinking that we're going to keep to kind of an every other year schedule unless there is something that is necessitated by a change in the regulation. Does anyone have any concern or question about that? Okay, great. We are also going to be making available documentation, and I want to really highlight these 2 documents in particular. I know the accompanying documentation does not seem particularly exciting, but we get a lot of questions from people who say, we're thinking about programming our templates in, or we're going to use here-on-click agreements, or we're going to pre-populate our templates, and our IT folks don't, they're kind of looking for some information. Do you have a Word document of the templates? First, we do not maintain a Word document of the templates, so you will have to convert the PDF into a Word document. But what we have done is we've created this field crosswalk, which actually shows you every single field in the template, every radio button, every drop-down menu, everything that populates through the templates, all the menu choices that are in the templates on every single attachment, page by page, including all the different templates that we have, including the modifications, so that hopefully that will help anybody in your institution that's communicating with a programmer or is a programmer to take that Word document without the formatting and put it into your system and reprogram it. So please communicate that template to the people in your IT group. We also really recommend that you show them the templates because Laura walks through a lot of the functionality in those webinars and really explains the technical piece of it very well in the webinars. I think it's hugely helpful for anyone that is technical at your institution. And then we also have a major changes document which outlines the changes that we made to the templates. So our goal with that is to better communicate to you guys what did we actually change in these templates, and also to enable you to again talk to your programmers. If you've already programmed your templates and you need to make updates, you can hand them this document and they will be able to see these are the substantive language pieces in the templates that changed, and this is how I need to change them. We literally do cross out, bold for new language, all of that detail in there. And we also are hoping that for people who have to float this to your OGC to get them to approve the form of the template, or whoever in your institution that does that, that you can then hand them, here's the new template, here's the old template, and here's a summary of exactly what changed from the old to the new. And that should hopefully help, fingers crossed, to expedite that for you. Any questions about that?
Okay.
One thing that we thought would be very helpful to point out to everybody in here is a little change that was necessitated by the change to the NIH notices of award. Just for reference, you will notice that some of the locations of terms and conditions on attachment 2 is changed. We tried to clump together all of the NIH terms and conditions because they're the ones with the most special terms. I know you're ready. You're ready.
No,
Go
no,
for
no.
it.
I was like, I think it's a big change. You called it a little change.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, true.
Maybe not. Maybe
Yeah.
it is a little. Maybe it's a medium change. I don't know. So, okay, this relates to the handout that I sent out at the beginning, and I only have 50 copies. And so, if you don't mind sharing. We wanted to highlight this new field that are going to be released with the templates this week, having to do with clinical trials. It's a clinical trial indicator. And I kind of wanted to just get a sense from the audience, one, if you understand where we're going with it and why we did this, and it relates to the guidance chart that's in front of you. So as Amanda was explaining, when you go into the template, you indicate it's NIH, you're going to have this pop up. And there's 2 fields in here. The first one says, the clinical trial indicator in section 4 of the pass-through entity's notice of award is stated as yes or no. So we're trying to flag which ones are clinical trials. Now you might say, well, why is this necessary if it's in the notice of award and I'm attaching to the notice of award? Well, if you think back to some of the meetings that we had prior, remember there's different situations where you have different types of clinical trials, and you may not be sure which FDP template or sample to use. And there's 2 driving factors to this. What's the billing model? Is it a fixed rate budget where the budget is based on a per subject enrollment model? And what's the statement of work? What kind of clinical trial is it? Is it what we're going to call a traditional clinical trial, meaning your phase 2 through phase 4 type of drug or device study? Or is it a non-traditional clinical trial? So NIH's broadening of the definition, maybe it's a biobehavioral study, maybe it's what they're calling the BESH, the basic science prospective study working with human subjects, but it's meeting NIH's clinical definition of a clinical trial. Well, in all these different flavors of clinical trial, you don't just pick up the clinical trial template. And in fact, it's not called the clinical trial template anymore. It is now recoined the clinical research sample. And the reason why is because you can have, based on the billing type, a per subject, per patient enrollment type of study that isn't a clinical trial at all. And so we'll get to that in another slide. But the reason why I'm calling this out is because I know it might be a little confusing for you, and I want to just sense if you understand what we're trying to do based on the chart that we have here to give guidance in terms of what to select, and also how we structured this. So this is what we did. 1, you're going to look at your notice of award from NIH to determine, okay, is this a clinical trial or not? And so then 2, what's the work being done over this at the subrecipient? What are they doing? And what's the budget type? So in this situation, this looks like it's coming from the cost reimbursement template, the regular cost reimbursement template. So we want to know, is the work being conducted by this subrecipient not a clinical trial, or is it a clinical trial? What is the subrecipient doing? And so what this chart does is it kind of explains to you And I'll show you right here, if, for those of you who have the chart in front of you, in the second line, the second row. So if you're sponsor type, you know, it's federal, we have a cost reimbursement situation, it's for a domestic site. The situation is that potentially the subrecipient scope of work is not a clinical trial, but the pass-through entity, it says in the notice of award that it is a clinical trial. Well, that's a situation where it could be that the subrecipient is supporting a clinical trial, but they're not actually doing a clinical trial. So it would make sense that you would pick up the cost reimbursable template. It makes sense that you would select in that second drop-down menu that the work being conducted by the subrecipient is not a clinical trial. To make it clear for everyone, the pass-through entity is a clinical trial, the work being done by the subrecipient is not, and this is what you're selecting in the drop-down menu. If I continue forward, let's say we have a situation where it's cost reimbursable, the site is domestic, and the statement of work includes by the subrecipient that it is meeting the definition of an NIH clinical trial, but it's not a drug study, and the billing type is cost reimbursable, then it's yes, you know, the notice of award says it's a clinical trial. You're using the cost reimbursable template. And then here it's giving you more direction. You would select, yes, you know, the work being conducted by this subrecipient per this agreement is a clinical trial. But that's where you can leave it, because if it's not a drug-based study, if it's not a device, this is not a per patient, per subject capitation model, there's no need to include any additional project-specific terms. And so what we're trying to do, and I'm not necessarily going to go through every line of this, but I just want to see if you understand where we're going with it. Do you agree with the direction that the working groups came up with in order to do this? And do you see any potential problems in identifying the scope of work of the subrecipient? And that's really, I just wanted to get your sense of what we're doing. Boy, you're quiet today. What is it? Okay, I have someone here. Yep, the mic's coming to you. She's over here.
So can I ask why you excluded phase 1 clinical trials? You
Why?
have phase 2 through 4 drug studies traditional, but not phase 1.
Would someone be able to answer that from my, my working group? I gotta remember.
The phase 1 is usually pretty small, so I don't know how often it would come up, but I think that that's another one where it could maybe depend.
So what you receive rather routinely is phase 1/2. So you're starting in phase 1
Yep.
and it's progressing to phase 2 in the
Right.
same contract.
Yep. Okay. Okay. We can look at that just to be sure that we've got it right.
No other comments or questions on this?
Otherwise, great.
Otherwise great? Oh. Well, that's good. I was dejected there for a moment. Like,
I'm not an expert. Phase 1 clinical trials, but I think the point is that you're trying to give people room where if you are issuing a certain scope of work, that you want to add specific terms that are appropriate for that work. So depending on what you feel is a risk level, like some subrecipients, phase 1 work might feel like the risk is low enough and you don't need extra terms that fit a clinical research sample, but definitely in the traditional model they work. And there's probably going to be gray areas.
so there's two main things I want to point out here, because I didn't go through the whole chart, which I know that Brenda and Jennifer, who are going to want me to point out, which is if it is a per patient, you know, per subject billing model, it's fixed rate. You should be using the fixed rate clinical research sample. That is what you should be doing. If you are mixing apples and oranges, which we hate to use, oh, they're laughing over there, hybrids, we don't like the word hybrid. One, you should be working with your subrecipients to discuss what is the best option there, because ideally, there are two different scopes of work, If you have one piece of it that's where you're enrolling subjects and another piece of it where there's maybe analytical work or meetings taking place, other work, that's two separate scope of works, technically it should be two separate subawards. One cost reimbursable, one fixed rate. However, people recognize that there are outliers to this situation where you work it out. We have direction and guidance in terms of how you deal with that, with these hybrids, but there is no FDP template that exists for a hybrid model. If you do create a subaward that includes these two different billing types, you would have to remove the FDP moniker. Do I have that right? They're shaking their heads, yes. Okay.
And put financial terms that cover both.
Oh, and put financial terms what?
That cover both.
That cover both. Thank you. Thank you. So that's one very important piece of this. The other important piece to this is the fact that there could be situations, because I know that several people have had it during negotiations, where for whatever reason a subrecipient might insist on using, or even the pass-through entity insist on using a cost reimbursement template, even though it clearly is a fixed rate model. And in that, for a traditional clinical trial. And for that reason, we did include guidance in here to say, well, if you have that kind of situation, then what you should be including in that template is attachment 2B, which includes additional terms that you would see in the fixed rate sample. That includes things in there such as confidentiality and I'm trying to remember the other stuff there. HIPAA language, monitoring, thank you, that is not in the normal cost reimbursement template, but that you would want it with a traditional clinical trial. But those should be under rare circumstances, and we do outline that here in the chart. Does this make sense? Yes. Oh, we got a question. I know you're waiting for the mic. She's coming for you.
No worries.
No worries.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, over here.
Yes,
Man
sorry.
in the front.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work, guys. We at GW have a hybrid situation right now. So,
Okay.
where we have 7 sites, they do administrative work at some of the sites. I
Mhm.
would imagine collecting some of the data from the other sites and doing their analytics or their expertise on the data, and then transferring it to GW. So what you would be saying is that if this was your world and you were doing this, you would suggest maybe 2 subs, or you would suggest removing the FDP moniker. What would you prefer as the director of the research office? Would you want 2 subawards, or would you want 1 subaward where we're removing subawards?
I have a very strong opinion on this, so I will, Jennifer.
I'll
would
let
you
Jennifer,
like
who
to-
led the working group on this, talk a little bit about it.
I have yet to see one subaward with both models done well, so my preference would always be to have 2 because they become very confusing. So
What would you want to see if you wanted to differentiate between the 2? So it could be 1. What would you want that to look like?
Ooh.
I think the challenge, traditionally, for the ones that I've seen come to me, are the financial terms. So there are typically not very clear financial terms. This section is fixed, and you can do this, that, and the other with this section of money, and this section is reversal, and most of the ones I see completely just call it one or the other, but put both models in here, and it doesn't work that way. And there are a lot of institutions that can't, in the financial system, keep 2 models in one account. So it makes it difficult.
I'm so glad that you asked the question.
Yeah.
Like, what the preference would be. Go ahead.
I was going to say also another consideration is that oftentimes the person who's doing the clinical collection under the protocol is different than the person who is maybe doing an analytical component of it, especially if you have a biostatistician or something. And then another component of it would also be by putting it all in one agreement, you may be obligating a one part of your entity. If you've got a hybrid entity, you may be obligating somebody who's in a non-covered part of your entity to following HIPAA more HIPAA stringent type rules because you agreed to them, because you're involved in the clinical trial piece over here. And so that's another factor to take into account, is what are the impacts that you're obligating perhaps the person who is not doing the clinical work to, that are above and beyond who is doing the clinical work. And sometimes those are very different obligations, and you may want to call them out differently, because one person may be seeing PHI and one person may only be seeing de-identified data. So.
And if you do get into trouble where you have one part of the work is being performed well and the other part is not, you can't terminate half of the contract. So
right.
You need to think through what happens in that scenario.
I think actually that makes it a little bit more complex, because they might be hand in hand. Oh, sorry. So I think that makes it a little bit more complex, because they might be hand in hand. So if you have a clinical trial that's not accruing patients, but you have a doctor that's still putting on 100% of their effort and still billing like that, but their accrual rate is slowed down, I think that has to talk to one another and be reflective. I don't know if your effort goes down because you're not enrolling the patients. You're obviously going to the clinic and trying to consent patients and do all that stuff, but I do think there's a hand in hand towards that scope of work. The other thing that we have also is, I'm going to just pass it back and forth with you. The other thing is, like you mentioned, is our billing systems wouldn't handle that. So again, we would need two separate accounts to account for the two different revenue streams, one being per patient and one being cost reimbursable. So I agree with that. And I do agree that having both in one FTP template, I've seen it a number of times and it's a mess. And it ends up getting shut down in my group because the accounting stream's all wrong. So by the time a quality assurance looks at it, they're saying, we can't really bill like this. You got to go back and redo this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
But I do like the two agreements. The only hesitation I have is that sending two agreements to one area. Again, we have two different people that might look at those agreements, right? Because one might be, you might have a clinical negotiator and you might have some other type of negotiator looking at the agreement. So I think, how do you kind of get the same package, the same person, so things are executed at the same time, there's no delays,
Oh, that's interesting. So you brought up another good point. Oh, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that is something that you're going to kind of face no matter what, because if it comes in and there's the two kind of combined scopes of work in there and there's the two budgets, it might take somebody longer to review it and parse out what's the right piece, what's the wrong piece, as opposed to, this is the clinical piece, it goes to the clinical person, I'm not the clinical person. But I think this goes to the point about a communication. I think underlines, it's a big thing that we have in the guidance document, which is, when do you need to really pull out, rather than just sending your kind of standard, please find attached a subaward, please sign it, send it back, and actually spell out, I'm attaching two separate subawards, they are for the same project, there's one that does this, there's one that does this, and we really need you guys to coordinate how you look at this, and we're happy to jump on a call with both sides so that we can work through it.
And I think I recognize that it's messy, this isn't a perfect world, and that we're all structured differently, and what you described is really valid. And so there's a point in here, we wrote, pass-through entity and subrecipient should discuss the best agreement options. And so you may need to explain how things work at your organization to Jennifer and come up with an agreement of what might work best. Go ahead, Laura.
Can I just speak to that?
But go ahead.
Then send it to
so for a traditional clinical trial, and we've even had to educate NIH on this, we found that cost reimbursement doesn't work forever. Because you get into the situation where there is no enrollment, but you're paying someone effort, which is why if we can keep the PI from budgeting it that way on the pre-award side, it makes it much cleaner on the post-award side. So most of the models that we see that are hybrid aren't effort for enrollment, they're effort for something else. They're effort for sitting on a DSMB, they're effort for coming to meetings, for doing statistical analysis. So those really can be kept separate, and I discourage my faculty from doing a model where there's effort for enrollment, because we end up wasting a lot of money and then not necessarily getting anything out of it.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes you have like a coordinator who's responsible for trying to get people into those clinical trials and helping let the PI know, hey, there's somebody here who's ready for enrollment.
Isn't the accounting for this, once the awards already come in and now you're issuing the subaward, sort of closing the barn door once the horse is out? Like, shouldn't this be something that at time of proposal that maybe we're talking about not proposing with these sorts of things, or proposing them as two separate subawards, so you don't have the issues with the IDC for some of the organizations that have a problem when you split it up, then they need waivers in order to waive one of the IDCs on them, or something along those lines. Isn't this something that we should be addressing at time of proposal, not by the time you
They're shaking their heads.
Yes.
In an ideal world, proposal time, yes. But I think the reality is, and I don't know how many of you here in the audience, you know, are reviewing and submitting proposals. You may get something the day of the deadline, not having to, the proper, being able to have the proper review for those things. So I think it's challenging to get that message out and to educate on this point. But it's valid, yeah. If it's all done right at the proposal stage, then you avoid these problems later on.
And I would say the one incentive to the faculty members to really separate out that and address it at the pre-award stage is if you've bucketed them as a subrecipient all cost reimbursement and they're really doing clinical work, a lot of times they could be doing that clinical work using their off-site rate. And then only the smaller cost reimbursement part is using the on-site rate. And then they're happy because they hear the word off-site, and often I find that they smile a little more than when you say on-site rate. So I think we do have to move on.
Yeah, we do have to kind of move on. Okay. So we are releasing the templates with these new fields. I think we welcome, you know, just your experience in using them to see if this is working out for you.
So this is just a quick screenshot of it. This will get posted when the templates get posted. And then this is just an overview of some of the changes around the...
Just really quickly, yeah. So Jennifer McAllister and Brenda Kavanaugh, you did a fantastic job of leading the group with the fixed rate clinical research sample, which is formally the interim fixed rate clinical trial sample. This is going to be released momentarily. I mean, we're still making a couple of tweaks to it, but along with it, they also led the group with a really extensive, really nice guidance document in order to guide you in using that sample. And it includes things in there such as what are the roles of the clinical coordinating center and the data coordinating center, and sample language that you can use for invoicing and payments, and guidance on drafting the payment schedule. One little thing that is new to that sample is that and we're still doing a final clarification on it, but instead of having the amount funded this action, which is confusing for a fixed rate billing model, we have these new options, which includes the subaward amount is not to exceed blank, or the subaward amount is outlined, as outlined in the budget or payment schedule in attachment 5. And so we're going to be providing more guidance for you on that, but I want to thank both of you. I also want to thank Laura Register again for who's going to be designing, you know, the final design of the sample. Stephanie Stone also is very, you know, instrumental in the creation of the chart, and so I want to thank you guys. It was great, and everyone who worked on that work group.
And one thing we also just want to point out for this year is that we tried to harmonize across all of the templates where we could, and that does include the subcontract sample and the fixed rate sample. So we tried to look at going back to the template, if we've got use of name language in all of these, how do we align them so that you're seeing the same use of name language across them? So wherever possible, we did that. There are some circumstances where obviously it does not make sense, either given the FAR or given the situation of a fixed rate clinical situation. So you will see some differences, but we have tried to make a conscious effort to also streamline the templates in the sense of looking at the language itself and how it appears in each document. So guidance.
Because I was so involved with the clinical group, The regular main FAQ group kind of went to the wayside this year, but we're not expecting major changes to that humongous document of 80-something FAQs. However, we are going to update it to align with any changes that were made to the templates. I'm trying to keep it simple this year, and so I'm actually glad I waited to kick off that group, just so that we have a little bit of time to hear if there's any questions coming up from the template release.
Yep, absolutely. So just a reminder, we did release the new subcontract sample that has been posted. We still are working on generating a short guidance document to accompany the sample. So if anyone has an interest in it, you can always email subawards@thefdp.org. And we're very grateful that Rick and Jim are going to continue to work on the guidance, and we'll be pulling together that group probably in October, November timeline. And then we also wanted to update you on some of our collaborations that we have going on with some of the other committees at FDP. So the first one is our IACUC collaboration. So for those of you that have not been part of these conversations, we have had discussions with the IACUC on subawards and MOUs and what's the overlap or lack of overlap between those, and does it make sense for them to continue to not overlap or not. So one of the holes that we found in this process is trying to engage our IACUC admins, who are the people in your institution that run the office of the IACUC. They coordinate a lot with your vets on site, etc. So what we're trying to do is really hone in on that group, and with that goal in mind, we are going to be communicating, hopefully within the next 2 or 3 days, a webinar with the goal specifically of engaging the IACUC admins and or your institutional officials, who are the people responsible for reporting to OLA. So we encourage you guys to send that to your counterparts in the office of the IACUC. You guys can both attend the webinar. If you've already attended our sessions on the IACUC subaward group, then you can feel free to skip it, because we'll basically be covering a lot of the same ground. Of course, we welcome you to come to that. But you and your IACUC don't even have to be in the same room, because it's a webinar, so you guys can both sign up for it independently.
But we want you to communicate after the webinar. Have a phone call or something and talk about what you learned.
That is the main thing, is that we're hoping that if you can get your IACUC to come to this webinar, that you connect with them afterward and take some notes. And we'll be hoping to re-engage with you guys on this topic as we go into the January meeting, and hopefully again at the January meeting. We've also been working with the Data Transfer and Use Agreement Group, and this goes to part of the templates that we already have in place, which does allow institutions to incorporate data transfer and use language into attachment 2. So we thought, well, let's try and streamline that language, have it be consistent, and have that be an option, so that people can perhaps more widely adopt the use of data use language in the subaward when it's appropriate for your institution. We do know that some institutions that's just not an option, because you've got 2 streams going, and it would be very disruptive to change that. So we're just a reminder that anything that we will be releasing will not be a requirement to incorporate into the templates, but we're making this a choice. So what we're going to be doing is actually, after much toing and froing about how to structure attachment 2 and to incorporate this, we decided that it would be cleaner and probably easier for a lot of institutions to just make it its own separate attachment. So it will be in attachment 7. We also thought that that would be consistent with the spirit of it being a new attachment and a pilot, because it would just be appended to the very end of it. So if you choose to leave it off, you don't have to renumber anything or worry about people asking where it is. So once we have those ready, we're hoping November, but it could be after that, just depending on how many comments or how many changes we need to make based on the comments we received from you guys who've taken a look at the attachment for us. We'll be posting it and then checking in on the experience. And with that, whenever we ask, how's your experience with the templates in the group, it's hard for people to always feel comfortable saying, I had this problem, or I like this, or I don't like that. So we really encourage you guys to just proactively write to us as you're using the attachment and say, using the attachment right now, and this is great, or this feature really could use some rethinking. So we'll be talking more about that in the future, but just to kind of put it in your minds. One thing that we did have as a point of discussion in the group was, how does your institution determine when human subjects data that may need a data use agreement or data terms in a subaward, how do you find that out at your institution? So this is another place where we were hoping to get some feedback from people. Anyone want to volunteer?
trigger?
Oh, we've got one back there. So, yeah,
Oh.
sorry. Sorry, we're making you go towards there.
My answer is short and sweet, but it's a intake form that's completed by the PI and the department administrator.
And what point do they complete that intake form?
So it's after the award has been made before we issue the subaward.
Okay.
So one question that I have, because we do the same thing, is how often do you find that information is inconsistent with an understanding that you later come to with the other party?
Occasionally.
Okay, occasionally. Okay, raise your hand if it's occasionally. Okay, raise your hand if it is more frequently than occasionally. Ah, okay.
I will say another thing that we've done is we've actually held a lunch and learn session with our department administrators to review the one-page intake form, because the questions seem pretty basic at face value, but it was really helpful to be able to communicate precisely why we're asking these questions and what the implications are. And so I think following that, we're hoping to get some better, more appropriate responses.
Would you be willing to share your intake form with us?
Yeah.
I'd like to see it. Thank you.
And one question that I do have is, if you were asking your department to fill out a form in order to send out the subaward, and you're asking them specifically to identify whether or not human subjects data is going to be transferred, et cetera, what kind of training is available to the department administrators to say to them, this is what constitutes a transfer of human subjects data? Or do you have like a web page or something? Does anyone have a resource like that at your institution?
Raise your hand if you do.
Ah, okay, there
Little
we go.
pockets.
So with the,
Oh,
Here,
wait.
Sorry.
Sorry.
it's in development. So
Okay.
as we've encountered that we're not matching with our sub and we're not matching internally when we have conversations with our compliance folks, we're developing these groups.
Awesome.
But I definitely think the education outreach training, also making sure your questions are explicit and clear and smart opening if there's more information needed.
Mhm.
You know, if there's certain circumstances where they can't. You just have to, you know, keep asking the questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
Does anyone ask for this information in a different part in the process? I mean, not at the issuance of the notice of award, at proposal stage? Anyone doing proposal stage?
Proposal?
Okay.
So we asked for it on the routing form, and the question looks something like, you know, are you using any kind of human subjects data? And it's meant to be broad, so that if there's anything that might relate there. And then when we get it on the pre-award side, it's flagged for the compliance person, and they take a thorough look, and can kind of put it on their radar if it's awarded.
Okay.
Okay.
We do that too.
Okay.
You do that too?
Great.
Okay. So other than intake form and proposal stage, how else are you finding out about it? Like, are there any other triggers? Or maybe you're not doing anything and so PI is just coming to you, expressing their need for data use.
Or discovery in the scope. I mean, we can see that sometimes. Our teams will.
So your teams will notice it? Okay. Here's one.
Oh, there's one over there.
So it's not just human subjects data, we have a state law on privacy that includes certain pockets of personal information. So we're also looking at asking our investigators at the time we're issuing the subaward if it fits that legal definition, because if it does, then we're required to include something, although we don't want to include state law in there, something about who's responsible for breach.
Okay.
That's a great point, yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
I was just curious, you know, because this pilot is coming with the option of including this attachment, you know, there's the issuance side and then there's also the reviewing side. And so sometimes, and I mean, my organization is one example where we have a subaward team that issues the subawards, but it's actually our proposal team and our project officers that review the incoming subawards. It's a different group of people. And we also have a separate data use person that issues data use agreements. We don't normally include it in the subaward. So I was just curious on the review side, is for you, raise your hand if the ones that issue subawards are also the ones reviewing the incoming subawards. And then how many of you, it's the opposite, you have two separate groups, okay. So I was just curious, do you see any issues on the reviewing side to then see a potential, these data use terms, or yes or no, yeah? And why is that? Let's hear.
So all of our incoming subawards from other universities that are going to be on the MPP template are handled by our federal team, who doesn't touch data use agreement terms. That's handled by an entirely separate team. So yeah, cross-training can definitely happen, but it would absolutely have to be an effort that we would have to engage in.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that? Yep, you do? Okay.
Sure.
One more.
We have the similar situation. We have two different groups, or three different groups that we're talking about. A DUA group that's in compliance and integrity. We have a negotiating team that does the intake or the incoming stuff, and we have a subaward team. And just like many people have said, we have a general or vague question in our proposal routing form that says that are you going to collect data, is it going to be animal, or is it going to be human? And through the scope of work and through that, our analysts are supposed to look at that and see if there's a need. That need would go to our compliance and integrity group to actually negotiate the terms of the DUA.
So, okay. I mean, it's just, as we go through this pilot, it's just things to think about. Is it going to delay subaward execution if you're having two different parties, you know, the individual that's reviewing the subaward, and then that piece of it that would normally go to your compliance team that's looking at the data use, or whoever is looking at the data use piece? Here's a comment.
I just want to ask a question. So I'm curious, institutions that state that they need a separate data use agreement for the transfer of data, is there some sort of OGC or compliance justification that has said that the terms of the subaward do not act as a data use agreement? Or is it really just an expertise kind of thing?
Expertise kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think for us it's an expertise kind of thing. I don't think there's any reason why we can't. It's just the way that we've set the office up.
Yes. Us too.
Yeah. And it takes a lot to undo that once you've kind of made that business decision. So.
For us, it's a business decision as well. We have two separate systems, so we track all of our agreements totally separately. Like, we would have to redo the way that the way that they request data use agreements goes through a totally separate system. The routing and approval process for those requests is separate. It would be, it's a challenge for us to kind of combine that.
Right.
Yeah. There was someone else. Oh, we have one more here. You're doing great work, by the way, passing that mic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're getting more exercise today, you know.
Than any of us.
Than any of us, yeah.
So we just encountered, it was the first time I've seen this, is that NIH asked us in one of our milestones to initiate and execute data use agreements with all the sites. So it's a U54 mechanism. I don't know if that's new and anybody's seen it, but it is part of our milestone.
Interesting.
And they said contracts and data use agreements.
Did they actually specify that they want the data use agreement and the subcontract together?
Well, I
quote unquote, I have the email, but yes, it was two separate, distinct, a contract and a data use agreement, so they
Or maybe they're leaving it up to you to figure out like what's the best way to
We're gonna
issue
do
it.
both, right?
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Okay.
But your template would help.
Yeah.
So we would love that, because we would attach it, and then we wouldn't have to do two.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd feel comfortable.
So you're comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we like the direction that's going in as well, because we have 3 systems, 3 teams, same thing. But I was just wondering, in your pilot, if you can entertain resource tool supports for that as well. So if you have FAQs that are talking about different processes or different criteria, and that can be incorporated as well.
Yeah, so we will definitely look at that. I do know that we've discussed guidance or further information for that. And then we will also be having a separate webinar for attachment 7 when that is released, but we're not ready to announce the date or dates for that yet. But we definitely know that putting the support out there is going to be really important for everyone, so we'll make sure to think about that.
And the feedback that you got regarding the language that you reached out for, did you find that was generally reached consensus? Or no?
We got a wide variety of very good points. As always, when you reach out to a broader base of people and you include different perspectives, you're always going to catch things that you kind of missed the first time. So we've got some things that we have to go back and look at. Everyone has their preferences and how they like to see things written. So we also need to take that into account, is what are real substantive changes and what are preferences. So we have to really peel through the language and look at that. And then I think there were some comments that led us to understand a little bit more specifically what guidance we would need to put out there for various institutions, because maybe some folks thought that the document was maybe a different document than it was, or what they would need to review for. So we've also got to think about how to take the suggested changes and really infer from that what is the guidance that would maybe be constructive for people. So we're just going through that now.
All right. We're almost at time, so we
Okay.
just got a couple more slides. We're done.
So working group late subs, the survey is ready for people to respond. We are going to be sending out the link. We really wanted to open it after the end of the federal fiscal year because we knew a lot of people would kind of miss it in their mailbox with all the flurry of activity. So we're going to send it out hopefully in the next week or so. It'll be open through open through October 31st. We encourage you to submit one response per submitting office. So if you have a unique DUNS number consistent with the conversations, open government, and the FDP membership model, please submit your own response and coordinate within your group. We are sending it to the admins. We will also send it out on the FDP subaward listserv. What's next? This is just the things that we continue to work on. We are thinking about talking about a subaward for use with federal agencies so that it doesn't have the invoicing certification language, things like that are problematic when you are a PTE to a subrecipient who is also a federal agency. So are we ready to start talking about that? What do people think? Quick show of hands. Anyone say yes, let's do it?
Is it from or to?
From us to a federal agency that is acting as a subrecipient. This happens somewhat infrequently with NIH and USDA are the two that I have seen it happen with.
So you're talking federal prime to us to another federal fed agency?
Yep,
It could be to a federal
absolutely.
lab.
Yep,
It
a federal
could be
lab, yeah. Mhm.
Which is the most
CRADA,
common.
basically, sort of, semi-CRADA.
A CRADA for those that cannot accept the CRADA. Yes? So I'm getting nods. Yes, okay.
The universities would be accepting the CRADA or the federal agency?
The federal agency would be
So
accepted.
it's common with like a DOE lab, for
Have
example.
the feds said that they're interested in that? Because typically they send us a template that they will accept to send out to them.
I've also had them tell me, you just draft something and we'll see. And then they just said then we have to remove or make void the payment section.
And any reference to the federal prime and
Right, exactly, yeah. So there's some funny things, and the different agencies always have a different response, so that's also fun. Um, so then these are some of the other areas. We are basically at time now, but these are some of the other areas that have been posed as areas where we could have further discussion and outreach with everyone. So think about them. We will perhaps discuss them more at the January meeting, depending on how that agenda shakes out. But if you have thoughts that you'd like to email us, that is also a great way to get in touch with us. Templates, don't change them. Contact us.
We're done.
Thank you.
Bye.